Finding nature's beauty in the woods can be peaceful, but at times can lead to horrifying and bizarre experiences. Hopefully none of you come across what can be lurking in the woods. Without further hesitation, let's begin. When I was about 9 years old, this would have been in the early 90s, my family and I lived in a house with a fairly big wooded area in our backyard. I say fairly big because it wasn't big enough that you could really get lost in it for very long. But it was big enough that you could walk into it for a good 20 minutes before making it to the center. It got pretty thick in some areas, and you couldn't see any of the houses from the neighborhoods once inside. To my friends and I, it was a magical world. We played in those woods all summer long. My mom would let us go in there as long as we were back by sundown. Like I said, this was the early 90s, and times were a little bit different back then. My best friend would come over, and we would run out there and play for hours. We played hide and seek, army, Star Wars, and anything we could think of. But our favorite thing to do was climb trees. We had a favorite tree to climb. It was a huge pine out towards the middle of the woods. The branches at the bottom were low enough that we could grab them and pull ourselves up, and the branches leading up were very strong. And we could climb really high and see the view from above most of the other trees. Sometimes, when I got bored at home, I'd go out there by myself. I'd climb real high in that tree and just think about stuff. I loved being way up there. It was so peaceful and calm. One Sunday, I decided to go out on a solo mission in the evening. I knew I didn't have too long before dark, so I hurried into the woods to get a good climb in. I was in my spot in no time. I remember it was late summer, and the weather was still warm late into the evening. I wanted to be able to see a little bit of sunset, and then I climbed down and hurried home. I just sat up there and daydreamed as I waited for the sun to begin to set. Then I heard a twig snap on the ground, and I looked straight down, and I saw a man standing at the base of the tree looking up at me. I remember he's wearing a filthy brown jacket, and he had a patchy beard. His hair was sticking up at random places, looking like he had been relentlessly running his fingers through it. He was just staring at me, with a bizarre expression that seemed to be one of wonder and delight. It was an extremely unnerving look, almost a look of someone that realized they stumbled across the gold at the end of the rainbow. That was the only way I could describe it. It made my blood run cold. I was completely numb, like ice had been injected into my veins. I didn't know how long he had been there watching me before I noticed him. Thinking about that still makes me shiver. We just stared at each other for a moment. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. It sounds strange, but I didn't want to scream or tell him to go away, because I had a feeling that told me not to provoke him in any way. After a few moments, he spoke.
"Are you coming down anytime soon?"
I shook my head back and forth. I didn't know what to say to him. It was clear that I was very uncomfortable at this point, and that should be enough to make a decent person go away. But he only grinned at me. Then he reached his hand up and grabbed the bottom branch of the tree, as if to test it to see if it could hold him. I do believe he may have been planning to climb up to me, but the lowest branch was flimsy, and it could not be strong enough to hold an adult. I thank God for that. He soon realized this and gave up, but I had seen enough. I finally broke my silence and started to yell for someone to help me. I kept screaming and screaming. The man backed away a step or two from the tree and began to mumble and curse under his breath. He flailed his arms in the air in a rage and began to make a motion like he was pushing an invisible person in front of him. Eventually, he turned and walked away, sort of stumbling with each step. I don't think anybody heard my cries, because nobody came to help me. I stayed in that tree for what felt like hours, because I wasn't sure if he was really gone. Finally, I climbed down because the sun was beginning to set, and I couldn't bear to be out there at night. I hit the ground and bolted back to my house, positive that he would pop out of a shadow and grab me. He never did. I made it home and told my parents. My dad went out to look in the woods, but he never saw anybody. We stayed in that house for about another 2 years before we moved across town to a bigger house. I never played in those woods again for the rest of our time there. I still think about that man sometimes. What would he have done if I came down? I have no idea, but that question does keep me up some nights. This was 20 years ago. I was about 6 months pregnant, and we lived in a small house in the woods. You couldn't see our house from the road, and without telling people that we lived in the area, no one had a clue that anybody was there. The driveway was long and winding, bordered by large hardwood trees on either side. We had no true neighbors in this rural area. My brother was visiting this warm summer day from out of town when my husband was away. We sat in the living room that faced the dense woods and the driveway. As we were talking, I noticed movement on the driveway. We both looked out to see a black Ford Taurus roll up in the driveway slowly. It stops before it reaches the house and sits at the edge of the driveway and the dense woods. My brother and I notice that the car has New Jersey plates. I don't know that car and wonder aloud who it could be. We continue to watch from the window as a man dressed in black gear gets out of the car, enters the woods with something in his hand. Is that a gun? I become increasingly nervous and start thinking about what to do. The man slowly walks through the woods perpendicular to the house, hiding behind trees as he moves along. He then disappears. We watch for movement for maybe about 10 minutes or so and see nothing. Where is he? My brother is a big guy, so he decides to walk down there and see what the deal is. He first walks to the car and sees that it's filled with luggage, but he doesn't see the driver. He proceeds to enter the woods where the man entered. I begin to feel watching this from the window is like the movie Rear Window. My brother walks about 50 yards into the woods and hears rustling leaves. He sees the leaves are moving about 50 feet from where he stood. As he stands silently, he realizes that the man is laying on the ground, covered and trying to hide while watching my house with binoculars. My brother yells out, "What in the hell are you doing?" The guy is startled, jumps up from the leaves. His face is covered with some sort of cloth and a dark ball cap. He takes off running through the woods towards his car. He makes it to his car, barreling down the driveway in reverse before my brother could catch him. My brother said the man was heavy, dressed in all black military-ish clothing. We reported it to the police, but nothing ever came of it. Why was he watching my house? And who was he? How did he even know my house was there when most passerbys were unaware of its existence? I felt uneasy there for quite some time, and we soon added a dog to the household to feel a little more secure. So, to preference this story, I was about 15 or 16 years old at the time. It was my best friend's birthday, and she had invited about 6 of us over to play a few games, such as Mario Party, Mario Kart, and Guitar Hero, and stay the night to celebrate her big 16. So, at this get-together, there was 5 girls including me and a boy. After a while, my best friend asked if we can go to the playground, which was about a 10-minute walk away from her house. Of course, being stupid teenagers, we agreed. Not thinking about how it might be dangerous since the majority of us were young girls, and it was currently 10 p.m. Anyways, we walked down to this park and continued playing Grounders when we arrived, which, if you don't know, is a game commonly played in elementary schools. The rules are, one person is it. The person who is it must close their eyes and try to seek out other players as they hide on the playground equipment in order to tag them in. But there's a catch. If someone gets off the equipment and the person who is it calls Grounders while they're on the ground, they are then tagged in. I know, pretty childish, but it's a fun game. After a few rounds, we got bored and decided to huddle around in a circle in the center of the playground equipment. We were just talking, joking around, when suddenly I heard what I thought to be something like rocks hitting a chain-link fence that resided in the back of the playground. I hushed the group. I looked over at my best friend, asking if she heard that. As everyone looked at me like I had 10 heads, she asked what I meant. And when I told her, it sounded like someone throwing rocks at the fence behind us. She responded with the classical, "Ooh, it's a murderer coming to get us." Naturally, I glared at her, flipped her off. She knows I get paranoid sometimes, but I have very good intuition, and something just felt off. A few minutes later, after some more rocks were thrown at the fence, I obsessively stared down the area, which was all woods besides the houses to the left and right of the playground. In paranoia, I noticed a light weaving its way through the branches of the trees. At first, I thought maybe it was just a headlight of a car that was coming down the street that was connected to the street of the park since you could vaguely see the headlights of oncoming traffic through them. But I soon realized there was only one light, and it was bouncing up and down like it was being held by someone who was walking. I quickly pointed it out to the group around me, as we all snapped our heads over in that direction. Coming up alongside the nearby house on the left side of the park was a man who wore a hat and white baggy dirty sweatpants and a black coat. He was holding a flashlight, but not the one on your phone, but an actual flashlight. He was far too away to guess his age, even when he sat on the swings closer to the playground equipment we were on. But we all collectively agreed it was strange, since he seemed, by guessing from his clothing, to be at least in his mid-20s, and he just came out of the woods by himself to sit and stare at a load of kids. After a brief discussion, we agreed that maybe he was waiting for a ride, or just resting for a moment. So we tried to brush off the fact that he was sitting there and so intensely staring at us. However, we started to take note that after a few minutes of resuming our very competitive game of grounders, that this stranger was slowly inching his way closer and closer to the group. He went from sitting on one swing furthest away to the next swing a little bit closer to the equipment we were on, until he was just about 10 feet away from our game. The whole time, he just sat there, watching. At this point, all of us had noticed the strange man attempting to get closer to us, and in an attempt to remove ourselves from the potentially dangerous situation, we made a group decision to leave. Getting up, we all piled out of the playground equipment, and in pairs of two, we walked down the stairs on the side furthest away from the creepy man. As we attempted to casually walk away, I kept my eyes glued to his figure, and as we neared the end of the street, he got up. Slowly at first, the man started to trail behind us, keeping his distance. I decided to keep my mouth shut at the time because we were about to make a turn. I thought if he continues to follow us instead of going the other way, maybe I'd bring it up to the others. And wouldn't you know it, the creep stays hot on our heels, not only following which turn we took, but also started sprinting towards us, screaming,
"You motherfuckers! I'll fucking kill you!"
At this point, the whole group burst into a sprint. The adrenaline that I felt made me run so fast I was ahead of everybody else. Everyone was ushering each other to run. I didn't even take a second to see if the others were still behind me. That's when I heard my best friend struggling to run. She had pretty bad asthma. I instantly felt terrible for running off on her, so I ran back to her side, grabbing her hand and quite literally dragging her along, repeating things like, "Deep breaths, you got this, come on, we have to go, now." This whole time, the man was still running and screaming behind us, catching up quickly. At this point, me and another girl in the group took it upon ourselves to get my best friend moving as fast as possible, both taking a hand and running at a pace that she could keep. Luckily, this park was only about a 10-minute walk from my friend's house, if that, and as we piled in through the garage door, I turned to see this delusional man start running up her driveway. He got about halfway until our big fluffy savior ran to the open door. My friend's 100-pound, fully grown German Shepherd. She lurched at the man, barking as we gripped her collar, in an attempt to keep her from running completely after the man. Luckily, her loud and sudden appearance caused the man to freeze in fear, before running away in the dark lamplit street. We were terrified for the rest of the night, and only managed to sleep after putting random items next to us. We even had a rake. But most comforting, our big fluffy hero, just in case that creep decided to come back. Years ago, I was walking my dog with my sister at a farm right by my house. The farm owner is a nice lady who still runs it today. She let the public use the farm in the woods for free to walk their dogs, as long as the dogs stay on their leads when by the farm animal pens and fields. The farm is quite big, and if you walk further in, there's a bit of woods in the back, which are normally deserted. We always feel safe walking there, because we've known the farm owner since we were babies, and the walls surrounding the farm are massive, which couldn't easily be climbed over if that makes any sense. Anyway, we go into the farm and make our way back into the woods because we can let our dog off his lead there. We let him off his lead and start walking around. The woods go in a big circle around the farm, so we usually just do a little lap around the woods before coming back to the farm and going home. We're walking along, chatting, and then sitting ahead of us on a fallen down tree log was a man. He was just sitting there. What I mean is, he wasn't drinking a coffee that he bought from the little farm shop, and he didn't have a dog with him. He was just sitting on the log, staring straight ahead at the trees in the woods. We carry on walking, and as we come a little closer to him, he suddenly looks over, quite quickly, and says,
"The only way out of this place is over there."
He was pointing at the woods, a part of the woods that just leads to more woods, and then a brick wall that surrounds the farm. We just ignored him and carried on walking. We told the lady that owns the farm that there was a man in the woods, and she said she hadn't seen anyone go in there before us, but she asked us, nevertheless, what he was doing. We said he wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, but we did tell her what he said to us. She looked confused and went into the woods with us and asked us to show her where he had been, so we did. We showed her where he had been pointing to, and she said, "That leads to the wall that used to separate the farm from the railway tracks." Apparently, years before, there was a railway next to the farm that stopped being used for whatever reason some odd 30 years ago, and now just sits there, overgrown and desolate. I really don't know what the man meant by that being the only way out of the woods, but the whole thing made me feel unnerved. We never saw him again, and neither did the farm owner. I hope everybody finds this at least a little creepy. I sure did. This happened when I was probably 13 or 14, so sometime around 2013. I live in a very small town. No stores, not even a gas station, in New England. My friend and I, after school one day, decided to take a walk on the old rail trail behind my house. This rail trail goes on for miles and even crosses several states, almost in a perfect line. These days, it's not in use anymore, and there are not even train tracks on it. Just a long path. That being said, many people in town use it for walks, bikes, riding horses, etc. Anyway, on this day we decided to take a walk, which we rarely did, so we walk up behind my house and start walking down the trail. We probably make it about a mile and then turn around to go back home. While heading home, one of our topics of discussion was horror movies. We both got a little spooked thinking about all that scary stuff, but it wasn't like we truly felt unsafe and scared in the moment. It was just thoughts. Because of those scary thoughts, I felt the need to turn around and look behind us. Behind us, about 100 feet, I see a man walking, wearing a long black coat, trench coat like. He was also holding something in his hand. The second he sees me turn my head and look at him, he began sprinting at us. I say to my friend, "Run!" She turns to look as well. We ran like our lives depended on it. We ran all the way home and went to my barn, which is at the top of the hill on my property, so it was the closest safe space in relation to the trail. Still, to this day, no one has believed us, but there was just something off. Could he have been just a jogger resuming his run after a break? Well, I guess so. But why the long coat? And what was he holding? Like I said, my town is extremely small, and there's absolutely no crime here. So it may have been hard for others to believe there was any malice intentions. But like I said, it felt wrong, and the way he just began sprinting towards us when I saw him still haunts me to this day. He just looked so menacing. A few years back, probably like my junior year of high school, I was hunting with a guy my mother was dating. He was a strange character in and of himself, such as talking about wanting to kill a bear with a knife just to be able to say he did it. I'm not much of a hunter, but I like to go sit in the woods and relax, and if all I gotta do is hold a gun to do that, sign me up. Anyway, this guy led me deep in the woods, which felt like about a mile, and I get set up by this tree. He sorta just walks off to find his own spot. So, I'm just sitting there by myself, enjoying the peace, and about an hour or two passes, and I start hearing twigs snapping, like someone is walking up behind me. I take a quick glance back thinking he was finally coming back, but it wasn't him. There was a guy in a sweater and khakis, who upon reflection kinda looked like the human version of Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. I just turned back around thinking he was going to keep walking, but he came up right behind me and just stood there for what felt like 10 minutes before finally saying,
"You out here by yourself?"
which is the wrong thing to ask a stranger in the woods, because I was freaking out. I basically just pointed in a random direction and said there was somebody just over there with me. He went back to standing quietly. Meanwhile, I'm thinking it might just be time to flip the safety off my rifle. But without saying a word, he just turned around and walked off again. Needless to say, I couldn't get comfortable for the rest of the time in the woods that day. The guy I was out there with didn't see him and probably thought I was just making shit up for a good story. But that still freaks me out to this day. I think I'll pass on the nature walks for now. If you have any stories that you would like read, please contact me. Information will be down below. The next time you're in the woods, take a friend and watch your back. Stay safe out there.